Welcome to the A Minute to Midnight Show. This is Tony. I'm recording this show from New Zealand, and I have A Marzuli on the show, recording from America, and it's a fascinating interview. We cover a lot of different topics, and I think you'll get a lot out of it. Hope you enjoy it. We welcome A Marzuli back to the A Minute to Midnight Show. It's been a little while, not too long since we last had you on, but I always love chatting to you. So how are you going there, LA?
I'm doing good, Tony. Thanks for having me back on. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's always a pleasure, and I know our listeners really enjoy having you on the show as well. So what's new in the world of A Marzuli?
Well, the Fatima film is now out, and we'll be speaking at the Prophecy Watchers Conference. Folks in your neck of the woods can sign up for live streaming. If you go to my blog site, lamarzuli.wordpress.com, there's a banner there. You can click on the banner and sign up for live streaming. I'll be speaking on the Fatima film on Friday night, October 13th, which actually is the 100-year anniversary of the events of what has come to be known as the Miracle of the Sun, which you and I discussed, I think, in some depth the last time I was on. So that's kind of what's going on. I'm also working on the sequel, which explores some of the bizarre events that happened on October 13th, 100 years ago, and also going back into the historical and anthropological terrain, if I can use that word, in Portugal, that goes back like literally thousands of years to ancient goddess worship, and how that may or may not affect what we're seeing in modernity, specifically with the so-called Miracle of the Sun. So I'm a busy guy working on the second film. I'm also working on a JFK documentary, which might be out in November around the anniversary, but that's wishful thinking at this point, but we'll see what happens.
So that is interesting. Now, you're talking the first Fatima film. I actually watched it, and I thought it was great. I really enjoyed it. In fact, I wrote an article which I put on the A Minute to Midnight website called "The Queen of Heaven, A Deceptive Doctrine," and I mentioned your Fatima film briefly in there and recommended that people watch it. So I spent a bit of time talking about the whole Queen of Heaven thing and where it came from. So now you've got my ears really pricked up where you're talking about the second one, where you're going to be delving more into that so sort of side of things. So can you, give us a little bit more on that?
Well, there's some very interesting dynamics to this whole Fatima apparition. And, it's like people, as I said in the film, people can believe what they want to believe. We're not here to disparage anyone's belief system or start bagging on people. You can believe what you want to believe, As I say in the film, millions of pilgrims go to Fatima each year. Millions of Muslims encircle the Kaaba stone. Millions of Hindus celebrate Guru Puja. Millions of Buddhists worship at thousands of temples all over Asia. So people have the right to believe what they want to believe. But it's my right to explore and try to uncover, especially when it comes to supernatural events, because that's what I've written about for decades, and that is the subject which has always piqued my interest, and that's the subject which I've written, books and continue to do films on. So what we discovered there was a fourth witness. There was a fourth witness, a fourth seer, as it were. For those of you who are listening and don't know what we're talking about, 100 years ago, and on May 13th, in Fatima, Portugal, 3 children, Lucia 10, Francisco 9, Jacinta 7, saw an entity that was brighter than the sun, extremely bright. And this entity instructed them to come and meet on the 13th of every month. And so they did. And their parents were wondering, what's going on? And they told the parents didn't believe them. The parish priest thought it was demonic. But this entity kept coming on the 13th of every month for 6 consecutive months. The crowds began to swell. And the parish priest, Father Fiera, believed that the whole thing was demonic. So it was very controversial. So they asked Lucia, Francisco, and Jacinta for a sign in September. And so the kids went back and asked the entity, and the entity said, fine, there'll be a sign on October 13th. And that day there were 70,000 people gathered in the field, and something did happen. which has been, in my opinion, it's a misnomer, called the miracle of the sun. But here's what Fina di Armata, in her books Heavenly Lights, and the other one is called Celestial Secrets, co-authored by Joaquim Fernandez. Their research, when Fina was in the records that are kept in Fatima, and these are the 1917 records. These are the ones that are all handwritten, and the kids come on, witnesses come on, and apparently there was a fourth seer. And Fina di Armata is in the archive. She discovers this. The year is 1978, so it's decades later. And she goes back to the village of Fatima and tracks this woman down. And the woman tells her the story. She was tending cattle, tending sheep, and she looked up and saw a child with very long blonde hair. And no one in Portugal has very long blonde hair. And the child, she couldn't ascertain whether the child was male or female, sort of androgynous looking. And the child spoke to her, this entity spoke to her telepathically and told her to come. And she was afraid and didn't come. So we're going to explore the idea of a fourth seer. We're also going to explore the multiple apparition sites, which are all over Portugal. And we went to 3 of them, Fatima being the main one, but we went to 2 other apparition sites where essentially nobody was. In fact, one of them, we got there, we were the only car in the parking lot, and we had the whole place to ourselves. And again, it was the same thing. Mary of the Bible was supposedly appearing to John the Mute, as this guy is called. But was it really Mary of the Bible? And this entity, it's complex, Tony. It really is, because this entity is always appearing around trees and rocks and streams, and that's exactly when it appears to John the Mute. Sure enough, there's a spring, there's rocks, there's trees. I mean, it's a very woodland setting, and you go back, several hundred years, because that predates Fatima by at least well over 100 years, more like 150, 200 years, and if I'm not mistaken. And there's a shrine there, there's a tomb, and we spent time there. And the idea that Portugal was a matriarchal society steeped in goddess worship, well before the Christian era, before the Romans got there, steeped in goddess worship. The priests that attended this goddess Mora, who the pagan, the people in Portugal worshipped, all the priests were castrated. So we're looking at some really, really weird stuff.
So how do you spell that name of that goddess?
Mauro, Mora.
Great.
And that's what we found. We found that all of Portugal has many apparition sites, that there has been in the pre-Christian era, the goddess worship, which is still way out in the country in certain remote places. These practices are still going on today. So it's really a mixed bag. It's just absolutely mind-boggling what we discovered, through just basically spending 2 weeks there and interviewing person after person, expert after expert. And we had so much material. That's why there's a sequel.
I'm looking forward to that. I'll be really looking forward to that second one. So was there the goddess Diana worshipped in Portugal?
Yes, during the Roman era, she was. In the Roman era, she's definitely worshipped. And we're also tying this into the idea of the strange phenomena which happened during the so-called miracle of the sun. When this craft or this object flew over the crowd, people's clothes were sopping wet because they had been standing in the rain all morning long. So now it's 1 o'clock. So this object comes over the crowd. And what's interesting here, Tony, the clothes are dried instantly. The ground is dried instantly. The windshields of cars explode. Hoods of cars pop open. Gasoline spontaneously combusts. Something is going on. a massive exchange of energy is going on. And people are terrified, absolutely terrified. Now, some people out there will say, oh, LA, the Old Testament is filled with imagery like that. I get where you're trying to go with this. But witness after witness looked up and described the object as a dull silver disc. And the question is, how big was this thing? Was it 60 feet wide? 40 feet wide? We don't know, but it certainly wasn't the sun, which descended from its place in our solar system and came crashing down to Earth. There'd be nothing left here. Nothing left here. So it wasn't the sun. So if it wasn't the sun, what was it? But, you tell something over and over and over again, and people believe the party line, that it was Mary the Bible, that it was a miracle of the sun. The sun did all these tricks in the sky and all this other stuff. And we're saying this has parallels to modern day ufology. And we've actually talked to several ufologists, which will come on the record. And again, unless people study this stuff, they don't understand that UFOs in modernity, in the present day, use clouds. Sometimes they will create clouds and hide in the cloud. Other times the cloud will move and the UFO is concealed within that cloud. Well, that's exactly what happened in Fatima. It stopped raining, the sun was in the sky, and then a very large cloud moved in front of the sun. And out of that cloud came the object. And it began to spin and then fall to earth like a falling leaf. So, all this stuff it's like, I'm not making this stuff up. We're just reporting the facts as we gather them, and it's up to people to make their own decision as to what they want to believe.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions. Firstly, what's your take on why they use clouds? And the second question is, this is supposedly an apparition to do with Mary. Did anybody actually see a Mary the supposed Mary herself on that day, or just this UFO kind of whatever it was?
Well, here's the deal. The children were the only people who saw the apparition, Lucia, Francisco, and Jacinta. Out of the three seers, only Lucia and Jacinta heard her. Francisco never heard her at all. This is because the children were given something by the entity to eat and drink. And I get this confused. I got to go back and watch my notes. Lucia and Jacinta ate and drank, but Francisco apparently only ate. I think that's what it is. I just got to go back and clear that up. But that's essentially what happened. So Francisco could see her, but couldn't hear her, whereas Lucia and Jacinta saw her and heard her. But she spoke voice to skull. She spoke telepathically, number one. Number two, when asked, who did the lady say she was? Lucia answered, and this again is the 1917 records, she said she was from the sky. The apparition in the 1917 records never, and I got to stress this, never, ever declares herself to be Mary of the Bible. Doesn't say that. Never says that. So we have a problem. Houston, we have a problem. And it's like I said, Fatima is really complex. And I've been sort of a student of it for a while now. Going there for 2 weeks in July was absolutely eye-opening. And the first film, I think, speaks for itself. But and I think we were fair in the film. What I mean by that, we didn't use the film as a bully pulpit, or to club people over the head, or lecture people that they're believing in something wrong. And we didn't do that. We just presented the evidence. This is what we discovered, and people have to deal with that, or they don't have to deal with it. It's kind of like the Shroud of Turin. I'm a frank supernaturalist, Tony, and I've been a student of the Shroud for 37 years. I was drawn to the Shroud of Turin 37 years ago when I became a born-again, spirit-filled Christian and accepted Jesus into my heart. I mean, that was 37 years ago. I'm 67 years old now, or just about 67 in December. But I was drawn to the Shroud, and I remember looking at it and realizing and studying it that the Shroud is not a forgery, number one. And number two, it has never been duplicated by anyone, including skeptics like Joe Nickel. I mean, their attempts at trying to forge a shroud is just comical. It's just laughable. The forensic evidence that's on the shroud is just astonishing. And a medieval forger would have no idea about bilirubin, about the way blood coagulates, about the helmet of thorns rather than a crown of thorns, about where the nail spikes are in the palm of the hands, about the absolutely horrific scourging all over the body. And yet, right above the chest area where the heart is, there are no scourge marks, because the Roman torturers knew if they hit him there, that he'd never make it to the cross. So, I mean, it goes on and on and on. And for those skeptics out there who are, frowning and rolling their eyes right now, I challenge you to go to shroud.com and spend an hour there looking at the preponderance of evidence. It is not a Catholic relic. And here's something, I'll just throw this at you. There's an artifact in Spain called the Sudarium of Oviedo. The Sudarium of Oviedo. It's a face cloth with blood stains on it. In modernity, this has never been done until the modern era. But we know for certainty that face cloth came to Oviedo, Spain in the 7th century. That's undisputed. All researchers will admit that. So in modernity, because we've got computers and everything else, they were able to take the face cloth and look at the blood pattern on the man on the shroud. In other words, overlay the face cloth, the Sudarium of Oviedo, over the face on the man on the shroud. There are over 40 points of congruency, Tony. 40 points of congruency, and the blood types match. So I'm a frank supernaturalist.
Yeah.
I believe in the supernatural.
Yes.
Are you kidding me? But I'm also wary, and I realize that Scripture tells us that in the latter days there'll be all signs and lying wonders.
Yes.
And a lot's going on in 1917, which we talk about in the second installment. The Bolshevik Revolution, the rise of communism, 1917. World War I, 1917. The Balfour Declaration is being talked about in the channels of Great Britain, or in the halls of power, I should say, in Great Britain. I mean, these are events which are just mind-boggling, absolutely mind-boggling, which would change everything in the latter part of the 20th century. And so, like I said, Fatima is a very, very complex situation, really complex. And the fact that there are many apparition sites all over Portugal is suspect to me.
Absolutely, yes, I agree. And yeah, that's really interesting about the shroud. That's a whole different ball game. That's fascinating, and yeah, I think it'd be good if people do look into that a bit more, because I've become more and more to the opinion as well that is 100% genuine. But yes, this Fatima situation is quite different. Because they're not only in Portugal, but there have been a lot of other supposed apparitions over the years of Mary as well, which I've sort of written a little bit about some of them in that article I did, The Queen of Heaven, A Deceptive Doctrine. But in those ones, she definitely claimed to be Mary. So in Fatima, she didn't, which is interesting.
Yeah, and Medjugorje, for instance, there's something going on there. But to the best of my knowledge, no one has ever gone there and tried to shut the spirit down. And what we have is a modern day oracle, like the Delphi oracle, in my opinion. And the bottom line is these entities want to be worshipped. These entities want to be worshipped. End of story. And they will do whatever they have to do to be worshipped. So when you read some of the, and Jim Tetlow, when he was alive, did a wonderful job on this, not only in the book, but in the film, Messages from Heaven. And when you start reading the messages from this entity in Medjugorje, things like my immaculate heart, stop right there.
Yeah, exactly.
Stop right there.
I am the Immaculate Conception. Yeah. It's that type of stuff.
Wacky stuff.
Yeah.
That's not the Mary of the Bible that I know.
No. And
this is something else. And unfortunately, people get all hot in the collar about this stuff because they think that you're attacking Mary. And, Mary in some ways, specifically in the Catholic world, has been raised to almost co-redemptrix with Jesus, not they haven't gone that far yet, but there are people that are looking at this and wanting Mary to become co-redemptrix. So what can I tell you?
Yes, that's very interesting. By the way, the other point is I was about the cloud with it before we forget. The UFOs, why do you think they use clouds?
Well, I think it's very utilitarian. If you hide in the cloud, people can't see you. I mean, it's that simple. They go in and out of the clouds, and there also could be um, something else that we don't understand that has to do with portals, gates opening, something like that. But it's definitely like a cloaking device. There was a witness who is an airplane pilot flying over the English Channel a number of years ago. And this guy spotted two 1 mile wide UFOs. Now, there are people who are trying to tell us that all this is like, Project Bluebeam, that these things really don't exist. Well, in our other film, which we did this year, The Watchmen Chronicles, that's the umbrella, the overarching title, just like Fatima is the Watchmen Chronicles. And the first installment was, in their own words, UFOs are real. We interviewed a pilot who was flying from Lima, Peru to Mexico City. And they're about, several hours outside of Lima. It's a night flight. It's probably 1 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And this pilot's extremely articulate when he was talking about his sighting. Very, very articulate. And does so with great specificity. And they watched this craft come in over 50 miles away and reach them in less than 5 seconds, which is, 35, 40,000 miles an hour, and stops on a dime. And it paces and tracks with them, formation flying, for about 7 minutes. I mean, are you kidding me? And then it leaves the scene in the same way. So, the skeptics out there, which cracked me up, reading books and reading other people's account are one thing. Getting out in the field and talking to people who actually have the encounters, so you're talking to the person that experienced it, that's a whole different deal. And that's what we do it in their own words. And that UFO was as real as you and me talking right now, in my opinion. And when it left the scene, it did the same thing. And it let out these huge columns of light, and almost like energy, like ball lightning almost, would travel down these columns of light. I mean, there were windows in this thing. It was a craft. It was a craft. And it had a propulsion system which, defies logic. Let me tell you one other story. A woman who came up to me at a conference, this is a number of years ago. She's sitting on a lawn chair in Los Angeles with her husband and a couple of other people. They see this big, huge, round black thing in the sky coming towards them. All of a sudden, the brown black thing levels off, and it's a craft. In other words, they were seeing it was flying at them with the underside of the craft showing. All right, and then it just all of a sudden it goes down. It falls down, and it's a classic UFO. And she said it flew over the house less than 100 feet in the air. They were all astonished, and it was dead silent. And she looked over at her neighbor, who was looking. The neighbor turned white as a ghost. So what are we to make of that? No sound. I mean, was it a demonic delusion? I don't think so. I think these are real objects, real craft. I think that they move with impunity, and I think that the cat and mouse game, which has gone on literally for decades, I think we are growing close to a time when the so-called revealing is going to happen.
So with today, everyone having cell phones that can take photographs and do videoing, why don't we see more photographs, or why are there no really clear photographs of these crafts? Because if there's so many of them, surely there should be more evidence. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's several things. A lot of them are just orbs in the sky. Sometimes they're seeing a craft, but they're too far away. On the other hand, some of the best UFO footage I've ever seen was shot by Dr. Roger Lear in Turkey, which we showed in our Watchers series, the Kumburgaz sighting. There are beings there. It's a craft. But the other thing is that sometimes cameras just don't work. The cameras will short out. We had so what do you do with that? I mean, we've had people. One guy, it's actually in the film in their own words. UFOs are real. He shot this thing with a small handheld, mini cam outside his living room window, and it was an object which was morphing in the sky, and we show the original footage in the film, and it's light. I mean, it's obviously something is there, and it's changing and morphing shape and color. So, I mean, that's pretty good evidence, in my opinion. Oftentimes, people, when they see it, they only see it for a few seconds, and then it's gone. And there are a lot of hoaxes out there.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is just differentiating between hoaxes and reality, because it's now at the point where it is so easy for people to make what appears to be convincing video,
Yep.
Yeah, and it's all hoaxes. And same with photographs. It becomes almost impossible to tell the true from the hoax now. So who pilots these crafts?
Well, that's the $64,000 question. All we can do is go to those folks who have been on the craft, and you get a whole variety of answers, everything from the grays to the tall whites, to mantis, mantis type entities. So, it's complex, Tony. And again, when was the last time somebody, an interview with an alien, live here on 60 Minutes? I mean, right? I mean, nobody's done that, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
That really is the problem.
Yeah. How does it fit in with the Bible and the accounts and the demonic, in your opinion?
Well, I believe that this is the coming great deception. I just think that we are in a window of time where even the elect would be deceived by what is coming on the earth, that men faint from fear from what is coming upon the earth, that Satan will come with all signs and lying wonders, that unless those days were shortened, no flesh would survive. Something is about to happen on this planet, which is unprecedented. When we look at I think that we're in the birth pangs. I think that we're in a window of time with the wars and rumors of wars, the earthquakes in diverse places, famines, pestilence. Look at the shooting yesterday, in Las Vegas. I mean, it's just non-ending. It just doesn't go away. It's when I'm at conferences, I ask people, are you better off now than where you were 17 years ago? Not a hand goes up, not a hand. We are in the birth pangs, which give birth to the time of Jacob's trouble, the great tribulation. So the UFO, the revealing of the so-called extraterrestrial presence, ties right into what I have come to call the coming great deception. And people will believe a lie, which is 2 Thessalonians. They believe a lie. God sends them strong delusion because they did not believe the truth. That's why you've got to take that whole passage of scripture. You just can't cherry pick the one line. God sends them strong delusion. So, what are we really looking at? There'll be a great falling away. God sends them strong delusion. So I think that passage in 2 Thessalonians has a dual meaning. I think it can mean that do not be troubled in word or letter, but the day of the Lord has come, that they will not happen until the apostasy, and then the man of sin will be revealed. Then it goes on from there. So, apostasia in the Greek means departure from the faith. But the fact that it can also mean departure, like harpazo, even though the word is not used, it could have a dual meaning. In other words, what it could do is it could say that the church goes up, but how many are really ready to go up? Which is, a $64,000 question there too. It's like you've got 1.2 billion or 1.8 billion Christians on the planet. How many of them are born again and spirit filled? Which, by the way, is Jesus's words, not mine, not my criteria. Jesus' criteria. That's his criteria. You must be born again and spirit-filled to enter the kingdom of heaven. Not my criteria, his criteria. So the only people who are going up, and I could be wrong on this, and I'll, if someone wants to correct me, please show me where I'm going wrong, are the people who are born again and spirit-filled. I'll give you a story. My mother passed away over the weekend. She was 95. She'd been living with us for 3 years, and long, slow decline. About 60 days ago, we found a blood clot in her upper thigh. Rushed her to the hospital. They administered, a Coumadin, and anyway, it got complicated. And that was sort of the beginning of the end. But she'd been long, slow decline. But that really accelerated things. And she came back from the hospital and basically was bedridden the whole time and slowly, very slowly checked out. So about 4 weeks ago, I go up to her and I go, Mom, she's laying in a hospital bed in our house. I go, Mom, let me ask you something. Now I got my pastor hat on here, Mom. Okay, I love you. I'm still your son, but I got my pastor hat. Have you ever accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior? She thought about it for a minute. She said, no. I said, well, would you like to do that? She thought about it for a minute and she said, yeah.
Great.
So I led her in the sinner's prayer and we prayed. What I'm trying to get at here is she was a Catholic all of her life, and no one ever asked her about salvation.
That's really interesting. Sorry to hear about your mum dying. That's always tough.
Thanks,
but that's a great way, to have that as an ending. But what I find really interesting is what you just said about in the Catholic no one had ever asked about being born again. And, I grew up a Catholic. And I never once heard it in Catholic church. But the interesting thing is that my grandmother, who was a Catholic, very staunch Catholic, but an amazing woman and a Christian born again herself and, charismatic. And it was her and another one of her friends that actually led me to the Lord, and I prayed the prayer with, a Catholic. So it was great. And, when she died, her dying, last couple of weeks, you really saw the type of lady she was, the love for the Lord and just marveling at nature and things as she was dying, And so I have no doubt that, she was saved and yet she carried on as a Catholic.
And that's fine. No one, it's all good. That's why the Fatima film, we're not trying to disparage people's belief. We're not trying to bang anybody over the head, and we're not trying to do that. But as a pastor, as a Christian, how about as a Christian first and a pastor second? As a Christian, I'm just saying, wait a minute, folks, what if? And the evidence seems to point into areas which are unsettling and very troubling, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. The other thing that comes to mind for me is, as you're talking about the deception coming in there, you get so many people trying to pinpoint who the Antichrist and the false prophet is, and you get those absolutely, it's the Pope and it's the Vatican, and then you got others that it's Islam, and the Antichrist will be Islamic, but these people don't take into account the possibility of what you're saying, a deception that a religious deception that is completely away from either of those streams in a way. Though I do believe the Vatican will play a role in it. I'm pretty convinced of that. But in Daniel chapter 11, it says, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of woman, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. So I really struggle to see how the Pope and anybody that's Islamic would do that.
Yeah, I honestly believe, and Chuck Missler stated this years ago, that he believed that the Antichrist would boast a, quote, alien, unquote, connection. What we mean by that, they'll say they're from, there'll be a hybrid, but they'll boast that, I come from another planet, but my mother was human, something like that.
Yeah.
So, and of course, it's all demonic. We know that. It's all demonic, utterly demonic.
Yes, yeah. So I kind of steer away a little bit from trying to pinpoint whatever it be, because I think the religion itself is going to be quite different. I don't think it'll be any any of the religions that we have today, it'll be some sort of amalgamizing of religions, into one sort of global universalistic religion?
Yeah, I think it's a completely different. It'll be a new age, humanistic religion, self-centered, not God-centered, and it will show this God man who has a lot of power, who will come to Earth and be able to manipulate space, time, matter, and energy. I mean, he will be perceived as a god. There's no doubt about it, and he will be worshipped as a god. So I think that's where we're going, and I'm just praying and I believe that the church will not be here for this. I could be wrong, but that's my belief. And it's so funny. People want to argue about this, like a September 23rd stuff that came around. It's like what it does is it gives Christians. It makes us look like we're Looney Tunes.
Yeah.
That's what it does.
Yeah.
And what we're told to do is go out and destroy the works of a devil and spread the good news. And those two go hand in hand, because when we're spreading the good news about salvation, about forgiveness of sin, about how you can here's an example. There are so many drug addicts in the world right now because of the drug cartels, and I think it's deliberate. If they wanted to stop it, they could, but they don't want it to stop it. It's way too much money, billions and billions of dollars. So they keep the thing going, just like Afghanistan for 16 years and counting. And so the bottom line is, if you're listening to this show and you're a drug addict, there's hope. Now that's a drastic example, but you know what? Every single man and woman on this planet is just as caught up and depraved as that drug addict. We're all the same. His pain, or that drug addict's depravity, just manifests in a way that's really overt. The rest of us, not so much so. But we all need a savior, and that's the whole deal. And all I know is for 37 years, he has led me and changed me in ways that you just, you got 3 hours. It is unbelievable. And lately, and remember, I'm 66 years old. I'll be 67 in December. I've been doing this, walking with him for 37 years. And I'm just starting to get, and remember, there's no race. And as my mentor used to say, it's not an alphabet. You don't learn A, B, C. You might learn A, M, Q, C. It's random. And each person learns at a different rate. He works with everybody in different ways. So someone might not get M until almost the last thing, or someone might start off with letter M. Get my drift? So lately, he's been showing me how to rest in him, how to let go and just rest in him. That doesn't mean I sit in a hammock all day and drink lemonade. That's not what I'm talking about. Work hard, do my stuff, but let go and let him, and knowing that he will direct my steps and trusting that will happen. There's a rest that comes from that. That's completely antithetical from everything that the world teaches us, is just letting go, letting God. We've heard that a million times, right? But resting in him, that's what it really means. We let go, let him, but we learn to rest. We just learn to rest. And for some of us, that can be really hard to do.
Yes, but that's great way of looking at it, and a great analogy. Actually, as you were saying, we all need a savior. I couldn't help but go back and think back to the Mary thing. The Catholics do say that Mary it was sinless, and put her right up there, which I won't go into that much detail. But if you look back at Luke chapter 1, verse 46, and Mary says, "My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit has rejoiced in God my Savior."
God, my Savior.
So if Mary was sinless, why would she need a Savior?
That's a scripture that a lot of people want to ignore, but that's it. My soul magnifies the Lord, my spirit rejoices in God my Savior. I need we say more? I mean, I love Mary of the Bible. Are you kidding me? I have no axe to grind there, but she's not the Queen of Heaven. Exactly. There is no Queen of Heaven. Well, there is a Queen of Heaven, but it's not what we want to be messing with, in my opinion.
Yes, I agree. Hey, you just, we're sort of well into the time, but just want to quickly go into the shooting, which is a totally different thing. What are your perspective on that Las Vegas shooting? To me, it just seems like an absolute Illuminati calling card there with the pyramid and the obelisk and the Sphinx and the everything, and then all the numerical sequences, because everything they do always ties in with numerology, and the number sequences are all over the place. I mean, when I say all over the place, they all line up to the type of thing, the way they operate. Just wondering what your thoughts are.
Well, again, it's very complex. I've been using that word a lot because most things in life are a lot more complex than we'd like to think that they are. 32nd floor, that's deliberate in my opinion. I think that there are multiple shooters. I think that Paddock is an absolute patsy like Oswald was. I think this was carried out by multiple shooters. And I think this is a scenario. There was a woman and a man who appeared to be Latino who pushed their way to the front of the crowd and telling people that we were all going to die. You're all going to die.
Yeah.
Tonight, you're all going to die. And they were escorted out of the area. Those people need to be found immediately. They knew something. They saw something. And here's the scenario. Whether they were staying at the hotel as guests, or perhaps she or he or both were employed there, we don't know. There's a possibility that let's say she's part of the maid service there, and that's noble work. Okay, I was a janitor when I was 18. That was one of my first jobs. It's noble work. It's kind of drudgery and emptying trash cans, but I was a janitor at 18, part time. That's what I did. And I made extra money, and I had no problem with that. It was great, and then I worked up from there. But so I'm not trying to disparage someone who's a maid, but maids have pass keys to the rooms. So what if she's cleaning and she inadvertently opens the door, right? Oh, and she sees something and she closes the door, and in other words, whoever is up there, they don't see her open the door. Get it? Or they're out of the room, or they're in another part of the suite, because it was the suite. And she sees what's going on. She doesn't say anything to anybody. She's absolutely terrified. And that's when she, now that's all conjecture. But I have a hard time believing that one guy did the shoot, especially this Paddock guy. And isn't it interesting how Paddock was shot? Apparently, originally it said he committed suicide. From what I understand today, he was shot by the SWAT team. So, what are we looking at? And immediately in the halls of Congress, Ryan takes off gun rights from the table. Pelosi is signaling we've got to do something. All the leftists in Hollywood yell up, we've got to round up the guns. And none of that, Vincente Fox gets up and starts lecturing us about, bloody USA. Meanwhile, there's more killings in his country of Mexico than the Gulf War or the war in Syria and Afghanistan combined because of the drug cartels. I mean, Vincente, get a clue. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of embarrassing. And the idea that the first thing that any dictatorship, any fascist government, first thing that they do, like in your country, they've done it already, round up the guns. The guns are bad. Can't have the guns. And, Richard Dawkins is making fun of Americans. Well, Richard, when you're in a position at some point in time with a Muslim terrorist, because you're living in the UK, and in 20 years, your country will be more than likely Islamic. And when they come after you, you'll wish you had something to defend yourself. That's what our First Amendment rights, Second Amendment rights, that's what they're all about in this country. That's why we have them, to protect the citizenry from a tyrannical government. That's why they were put in there, because our founding fathers realized that governments have a tendency to become completely corrupt and authoritarian, which is exactly what we see in our country right now. But all we need to do is go back into World War II. Hitler rounded up the guns. Look at how many people were killed. Stalin rounded up the guns in the Soviet Union. According to Solzhenitsyn, 60, 70 million perished in the gulags. The same thing. Mao rounds up the guns, the Great Leap Forward and all this other nonsense. 80 million Chinese dead in their gulag system and counting. Same thing in North Korea. It's always the same thing. And yet these left-wing loons in America think that somehow if we do this, it's going to solve everything. Meanwhile, you can't have a gun in Chicago, all right? And that's the murder capital of the world right now. Go figure.
That's interesting. Yeah, in New Zealand, it's not as bad as some countries. You can still get licenses and have guns, but certainly nothing that's automatic or semi-automatic or anything along those lines. But it is illegal to use a gun for self-defense here. But at least,
right?
Yeah, it is. But at least people can get a license to have a gun. It's not impossible,
Right.
sort of thing. But yeah, I don't know. I guess with America, it's like it's so far. How could you even go about it? I don't really think, well, personally, that anybody needs automatic guns or machine guns. They're really only designed for one purpose. But in terms of, the whole taking all the guns away, no, I don't think so. I don't think it's a good idea. And it's interesting that it's the radical left that are complaining about this, whereas, like you mentioned Adolf Hitler, well, he was radical on the right, supposedly. So they both ends take away the guns. So in the end, it's just, two wings on the same bird as far as I'm concerned, radical left, radical right. It's a Hegelian dialectic, and it's all part of, one beast.
Exactly.
So, but yeah, it's certainly interesting to see how this plays out. I noticed that the shooter had ties to a predecessor of Lockheed Martin, which is the biggest defence contractor in the world. So I think there's, I look at the possibility it could have been an MK Ultra programmed multiple.
Well, that's what we think. Russ Disdar and I had a long chat about that. When you look at Jared Loughner, the Batman shooter, the VTech shooter, Adam Lanza, it's all the same thing. All these guys have one thing in common: they are high on psych drugs, and we don't know. As usual, we don't know anything about Paddock yet. Really, we don't know. We don't know what we're looking at here. As usual. Something happened. It's not a false flag. People died. I believe that.
Yeah.
That part of it. But I don't believe that you can shoot 500 rounds with an automatic weapon. You'd have no shoulder left, man.
Yeah.
These are high-powered rifles. You'd have no shoulder left. So it's got to be more than one guy. And I'm trying to dig into it like everybody else, but I'm just not buying the official version. Not yet, anyway.
No, I think definitely I don't either. In fact, I spent all day yesterday making a video on it, and because as soon as I saw the pyramid and everything in the background, I knew straight away this was
pyramid, obelisk. There it is. There it is. The Sphinx. And see, people, let me end with this because I know we're getting out of time here. What people don't realize is that Egypt was a full-blown occult practicing country. And these guys were steeped in it. And now it's like in Vegas, it's glorified.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. What are we looking at here? Why are we doing this in this country? So, 32nd floor, obelisk, pyramid, Sphinx. What is the end game? I don't know. I don't know what the end game is. There's several I can think of. One would be to create complete chaos, civil war in this country. The second would be to have, draconian gun laws like they do in Australia and round up all the guns, which would then cause a civil war in this country. Wouldn't happen because they've tried. Obama tried. They've been trying. Every time this happens, the VTech shooter, Jared Loughner, Batman shooter, every single time, this is what the first thing, it becomes politicized in this country. So the left are, earnestly trying to take our Second Amendment rights away. That's the bottom line.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And anything that is done by occultists requires a blood sacrifice, and for the fact that it was done in front of, where it was done, basically at their altar, in a sense, I think that there's some real significance there. There's something big. The gun control is a part of it, but I also think there's something more and deeper than just that as well. We are pretty much at the end of our time. Can you give the listeners your websites again?
Sure. If you're interested in checking out the film, you can go to thewatchmanchronicles.com, thewatchmanchronicles.com, and also lamarzuli.net.
And you have a blog too, don't you? A blog website? Yeah.
lamarzuli.wordpress.com.
Okay, so there's 3 there. Yes, and when do you think firstly, people should get the first Fatima film for sure. I'd say definitely encourage people to watch it. It's great. I really enjoyed it. When did you say you think the next one will be out?
Well, I'm going to try to get it done by the end of October, but, it'll probably be more like November sometime before we get it out.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks for being on the A Minute to Midnight Show.
Tony, always a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Cheers. Thanks.
Take care.
Folks, A Minute to Midnight is run 100% by donations. We really do appreciate the people that contribute to helping us keep this running. We couldn't do it without you. We put all of our shows on YouTube, on iTunes, and also as audio-only downloads on our website. Our website is aminutetomidnight.com, and midnight is spelled MIDNITE. A Minute to Midnight is run by a small team, a couple of us in New Zealand and also a couple of people in the USA. And we put out articles as well as shows on our website. I write, play and record all the music that we use in our shows, and you can find some free music for download on our website as well if you want to. It'd be great if you would like our video here and also maybe subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already done so, and follow our blog on aminutetomidnight.com. That's about it for this show. We will catch you in a few days' time with another episode of the A Minute to Midnight Show. Until then, this is Tony saying goodbye.